it has caused me to think very, very seriously about shamanism, about their insistence that they work through ancestor magic, and about the question of death. Just what is biology trying to do? And what is the nature of our form? You know, metabolism, we come into being with a morphogenetic program. And by eating, first our mother's milk and then pablum and then the stuff of the world, we stabilize the form. The flesh is replaced every few months or years, but the form stays. Over a long period of time, the form sort of withers and hunches and wrinkles, but it's recognizable. 70 years after birth, the person is still recognizably the little girl or boy that they were at 5 years old in most cases. So then at death, the form fails and metabolism fails, and you no longer are maintained far from equilibrium in what's called the living state. Instead, you know, everything stops. And the body becomes an object, like a piece of furniture. It can be stacked like cordwood or dealt with in whatever way anybody wants to. But perhaps nature does not create this form in vain. And perhaps in the world of higher dimensions and possibilities, this thing is preserved. It is certainly a persistent intuition of many religions that what life is about is creating something called a vehicle, an after-death vehicle, a body of light, a diamond body, something which endures, and that at death is released into some kind of super space where it has an entirely other kind of existence about which we can know and say nothing. When you look at our past, it seems to support this idea to some degree, in that we all are here, and yet we came out of the bodies of women. And in a very mysterious process. I mean, it always seemed to me, people always said, you know, what sex is about is the union of egg and sperm, and that's where people came from. Well, at age 8, I was not satisfied with that. I mean, they always wanted to talk about sex, but what I wanted to know was, but where do people really come from? I understand about how we get them downloaded into meat, but where are they? You know, where are they? I mean, where was I 1,000 years ago? Where was I 1,000,000 years ago? And you say, well, you didn't exist. Well, then you came into existence 50% over here in your father's sperm and 50% over here in your mother's egg. Well, then did I exist? You know, my mother had the egg, which became me from the time she was born. And if my father was younger than my mother, so half of me apparently existed before the other half existed. Say, this sounds like messed up thinking of some sort. Isn't it rather that a pattern is making a series of transits from one dimension to another? And, you know, dying is not like birth, in the sense that in the womb you're alone. Here we have our wonderful planet full of interesting people, and we die away from our group. When you start down the birth canal, it's not because you're lonely, because the concept lonely could hardly arise in the womb, I think, because there is no other except the other of the complete surround, which you may or may not image as human. You may think of it as the world, not an extension of myself. So, because I'm not the smartest person in the world, for sure, but I'm also not the stupidest person in the world. And I've been more or less around the block, the major religions, the major schools of transformation, the major themes and variations on sexuality. I'm like a normal person. And I tell you, from where I'm standing, it looks to me like the biggest news there is. I do not understand why there aren't 4-inch headlines. Scientists announced discovery of hyperspace, nearby inhabited dimension confirmed by laboratories in England and Russia, or some crap like that, But it never happens. It seems to belong. It's not part of our official culture. It's not recognized, it's not sanctioned, it's not allowed. And, I have somehow found a unique kind of niche, but most people who talk like this don't get a chance to make a living. They're put in back wards and heavily sedated and kept from contact with the rest of people because it's madness. But it's not dysfunction. It doesn't... I know how to hold my fork, make a phone call, pay my bills. What kind of madness is it? It's just a minority opinion. It's not madness. But it's a minority opinion because it's a minority experience, for crying out loud. I mean, if everybody lived in Hawaii and you were an Arctic explorer and you insisted that part of the planet was covered with ice 5 miles thick and the sun stayed up 24 hours a day, they would just put you away. Turns out it's the fact of the matter. So this is a polar region of human experience that very few people have mapped or been to, and yet we don't have a full picture. I mean, I would like to know, what would Jean-Paul Sartre have said? What would Nietzsche have said? What would Wittgenstein have made of this? I mean, all these people based their lives and their professions on the datum of experience. Well, by God, here's a datum of experience. Put this in your pipe and smoke it, and we'll talk datum of experience. Yeah.
I was wondering, through the history of your taking DMT, do you sense a progression as like a state as you're maturing, so you go further and further with each experience? And how often can you take it?
How often can you take it? You can take it every 24 hours. People have an interesting relationship to it. A lot of, like when you give it to someone who's never had it, they've usually been furiously hyped, so they're quaking in their boots. And if you can get over all that and actually get them to do a huge amount, often they come down literally begging for more. And I tend to resist giving them more because I've noticed that there seems to be a slight reflex, a slight tolerance. The second flash, if you go into it immediately, is not as strong as the first. But that person who came out of it clawing and begging for it, 24 hours later, if you offer it to them, they may hesitate. They may even take a pass. Because, as I've always said, it's the implications of it. And you don't get the implications together in the first 5 minutes. You say, my God, what was that? Well, and then you sit down under a tree somewhere by yourself and try to answer the question, what was that? And it makes your hair stand on end. Was I dead? Was I in the presence of extraterrestrial minds? Did that really go on? Was it really real? And so there's a kind of a reluctance to do it. It's like jumping off a cliff into cold water. You really have to screw your courage to the sticking point. And I don't know why that is, because every time I do it, I'm absolutely delighted. And I have immense resistance to it. And every time I do it, it's just like, yes, I remember. And they scream in greeting. I mean, they just turn out by the dozens. Say, here he is, tremendous, you send so many, you come so rarely, well, let's get on with the show. And then, the Fabergé eggs, the dance, the whole thing. It's boundary dissolving is what it is, and we have a real aversion to that. When the boundary that's dissolved is serious, we have a real aversion to it. And the other thing about DMT that's fascinating, that I should have mentioned, I suppose, is that we associate these drug experiences with slight alterations of our judgment. When you drink liquor, you become socially capable of taking risks that you wouldn't ordinarily take. I'm speaking of guys now. In other words, the liquor slightly changes your judgment about what is proper and what you can get away with and so forth and so on. The strange thing about DMT is it doesn't affect your mind. It does not affect your mind. So you come into that place neither happier nor sadder than where you left. You are not stimulated. You are not depressed. You are not anything different. You are exactly the same person that you were. And yet the world has disappeared. It's been completely replaced, 100% swap out, and here you are in this elf nest. And if you were on ketamine and you were to wander into this elf nest, it would just be fine, because everything is fine on ketamine. The first thing you notice when you do ketamine is that you've stopped worrying about the fact that you just did ketamine. That, it impairs your judgment, in other words. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's appropriate to not worry on ketamine. But I like to keep my wits about me. And on DMT, you keep all your wits about you. It isn't about you. People say, well, I'm depressed. Should I do it? Or I just had a big fight with my girlfriend. Should I do it? What difference does it make? Who cares about you and your problems? And it's not like that. It's what it is, and you can have it or not have it or whatever. It's very, very convincingly another place, and that's startling. I always close my eyes because I want to see inside. If you keep your eyes open, it's plenty peculiar. I mean, everything changes, and if you take a big enough hit, you can't tell whether your eyes are open or closed. That distinction seems trivial. You're just there, eyes open or eyes closed. But I like to do it on a sunny hillside, outside. It's the only one of these things that I like to do in light. It'll work in darkness. But light is spectacular, Just lie down on a sunny hillside, calm down, breathe deeply. If you've had to climb to get to where you are, breathe that all away. You want to be absolutely calm and still. And I do it alone because I make strange noises and stuff, and I don't want to be interrupted, critiqued, helped, or any of that malarkey. And then I just do it. And there's nothing like it on this planet. And the puzzle of it is there's nothing like it in human history. No secret society, no Gnostic cabal, no group of Talmudists or Tantrics, I think, ever came near this. There may be other mysteries in this world that I know nothing of, that are in fact the private and closely guarded property of these lineages and all that. Who knows? But this was